Sega Mega Drive / Genesis beat-em-ups. This is probably my favourite genre of retro video game, I think. In two-player cooperative mode, even the most mediocre of side-scrolling beat-em-ups is a pretty damn good time, in my opinion. And when you get something like Streets of Rage or Golden Axe to blast through, it's f***ing biblical. There were many beat-em-ups on the Mega Drive / Genesis, of course, but which one is the best? Is it a foregone conclusion already? Yes, of course it is, but as we all really ought to know, life is a journey, and so too is this video. So please join me on a sacred quest into the magical and terrifying world of Mega Drive beat-em-ups. And please try to smell the roses along the way. And the trash cans, and the apples, and the roast chickens inside the trash cans.
Enough!
Double Dragon 2 is a Mega Drive beat-em-up developed by Quest and published by Palsoft. One day, the Black Warriors were gathered on a certain spot after their usual rampaging of the city when a young woman accidentally stumbled into their meeting. The gang brutally murdered her without mercy. Jesus, that's a bit bleak, isn't it? Her name was Marion, Billy Lee's girlfriend. With his older brother Jimmy, Billy sets out on a mission to get his revenge on the Black Warriors. This one has a score of 40 from the good folks at Sega Retro, and that's because it's f***ing absolutely dreadful. I wouldn't even give it 40, to be honest with you. Can folks please help me? Is this actually running right, or is this a problem with my EverDrive or something? Look at the performance here, it's absolutely dreadful. The hit detection is f***ing atrocious, and you move so slowly that you feel like you're standing in a goddamn swamp. Is this really how it's supposed to run? Answers on a postcard, please. I mean, the first one's not very good, but this one is truly dreadful. It comes bottom of the list for me. Sword of Sodan is a linear beat-em-up game developed by Enterprise Software, a port of the titular 1988 Discovery Software International game Sword of Sodan on the Amiga. Sword of Sodan is a side-scrolling beat-em-up where the player can control either an unnamed male or unnamed female, walking towards the right of the screen and hacking and slashing enemies along the way. Being originally written for the Amiga, the control scheme for Sword of Sodan is built around one-button joysticks, which were prevalent across home computing at the time. On the Mega Drive, the main controls are split across B and C. Jumping is assigned to B, where holding down the button results in a higher jump, but is also used in conjunction with left or right to turn the character around. C swings the character's sword, and combined with up, right and down, other attacks can be made, and down crouches. Thanks. This one gets 48, based on 27 reviews. Originally an Amiga game, Sword of Sodan is most notable for being one of the poorest received Mega Drive games ever released, and was consistently voted the system's single worst game by readers of Beep Mega Drive magazine. Well, yes, it is certainly pretty bad. It has very large and detailed sprites with hardly any animation though. It's mindless really and very slow, and there's no music. You can kind of crab walk to the side and slash away at people. There's no strategy to it whatsoever really. You can drink potions and shit. Batman Forever is a beat-em-up video game based on the film of the same name, of course. Though released by the same publisher at roughly the same time, it is an entirely different game from Batman Forever, the arcade game. The controls are largely based on move lists and key sequences, whatever that means. Some gadget moves involve moving away from the enemy right before pressing a punch or kick button. The gadget list is selected by the player at each level, with 3 standard gadgets for each character and 2 gadgets selected from a list. There are also 4 hidden blueprint gadgets. The Super NES and Genesis/Mega Drive versions of the game are very similar. GamePro panned the Super NES version as being the worst of the Super NES Batman games. They dismissed the training mode as lacking the winning elements of a decent fighting game. Commenting on the normal mode, they criticised the frustrating difficulty, particularly the lack of continues and the time limit in the 3rd stage, and stated that the digitised sprites were done well but clashed with the washed-out background graphics. Next Generation praised the look of the digitised sprites but gave the game 1 out of 5 stars, citing boring gameplay and a poor control configuration. Frank Snyder of Computer Game Reviews wrote that the actual experience of playing Batman Forever isn't much better than that of watching the movie. What? The game was a major commercial failure. I was really disappointed with this film when I saw it at the cinema as a kid because I was a big fan of the Tim Burton ones and I thought it was a bit shit, but I won't hold that against the game. What I will hold against this game though is that it's shit. It has impressive digitized graphics for a Mega Drive game, but it has bad music in my opinion, and it is also just completely baffling. I got stuck immediately and then had to Google it to find out that you have to tap the grapple button, then immediately press up. Interesting. Now that's one word for it. And then 5 rather unappealing minutes pass, then you have to move over this bridge and find a hole that you can't get down, so you have to open Google again and Jesus fuck Christ. In fact, I found that there are YouTube videos dedicated solely to this one problem. Jesus, that can't be a good sign, can it? Then about a minute later you get into this corridor and you can't find where to go and f off. I had the Sunsoft Batman game based on the original movie and the Adventures of Batman and Robin games back in the day on my Mega Drive, and they were both vastly better than this one, I'm afraid. The Tick is a Sega Mega Drive beat-em-up game developed by Software Creations of America based upon the television series of the same name. It was published exclusively in the US by Fox Interactive in December '94. The Tick began development at Software Creations in Manchester, England, weirdly just down the road from me, before being moved to the company's American subsidiary, Software Creations of America. It's very typical for the side-scrolling genre. The Tick's signature humour is present in various parts of the game, such as his unorthodox gestures and his battle cry after completing a level. Electronic Gaming Monthly gave the Genesis version a 4.75 out of 10, panning the game for its failure to capture the humour of the titular character, Tick's limited number of moves, the monotonous repetition of the same enemies, the irritating sound effects, and the general boring tone. Wow, yes, this is quite nicely presented, but it's boring. It's very boring. The collision detection is very finicky and annoying, and it's also really confusing. I couldn't really figure it out at all, and it didn't give me enough to make me want to figure it out in the first place. What? Nightmare Circus is a platform video game developed by Funcom and published by Tectoy for the Mega Drive. The game was released in Brazil in 1996 and eventually in North America via the Sega Channel in 96. Also, it was released on the Sega Channel in the UK. The story begins with a circus that was held out in the desert of Arizona. On opening night, the circus was burned completely to the ground by its shady and villainous operator, the Jester, who intended to cash in on an insurance policy. Many years later, a Native American named Raven, who had lost relatives in the fire, goes to investigate the location where the circus was held and where supernatural events have been reported. You can probably guess what happens next. Raven must go through multiple levels of the circus environment using various fighting moves to destroy enemies. On the Tectoy blog back in the day, some man wrote that Nightmare Circus is not one of the best platform games on the Mega Drive. With bad controls and stages with confusing layouts, this is a game that should have stayed in the oven for longer. However, it is worth the curiosity that the cartridge version is exclusive to us Brazilians. This is a very strange one. It's quite nicely presented actually, but I haven't got the foggiest idea of what's going on. This guy walks extremely quickly, like a power walk, kind of like those guys you see in the Olympics. The zombie things here have guns. Yeah, it's kind of hostile to the player. I kind of rubbed me up the wrong way, to be honest with you. I don't know, I don't get it.
I don't get it. I don't get it. I don't get it.
Don't you know the building is on fire?
Last Action Hero is a Mega Drive and Sega Game Gear action game based on the 1993 film of the same name starring Arnold Schwarzenegger. It was only released in North America. After receiving a magical movie ticket, young Danny Madigan is sucked into a theatre screen and into an action movie starring indestructible Los Angeles cop Jack Slater. Slater's arch enemy, the ruthless assassin Mr. Benedict, gets a hold of the ticket and transports himself to the real world. Danny and Jack must follow him and stop him. It's a side-scrolling beat-em-up played as Jack Slater. He moves left and right, he crouches with down and jumps with C, he punches with B and kicks with A. He can only punch while standing. He can kick while crouching with down and A, but not after jumping, though he can do a jumping split kick with up and A that hits enemies on both sides of him. Hope you're paying attention. There are two driving stages where Jack is driving a car, believe it or not, controlled from an overhead perspective. The car speeds up with right or slows down with left. Amazing. Jack has a health meter with 8 segments. He loses health as he is attacked by enemies and loses a life if he loses all of his health or if time runs out. The game ends if the player runs out of lives. There are no continues.
There is no bathroom!
Last Action Hero received glowing reviews upon its release. Amiga Action called the Amiga version utter trash and wrote about the beat-em-up gameplay. It's been done a million times before and each one of those million has been better executed than this. In later reviews for the website All Game, Brett Allen Weiss heavily criticised the Genesis and SNES versions, believing they were rushed through development in order to capitalise on the film. No, this one didn't go down well at all, and it didn't go down well with me either, to be honest. It's playable enough, but very samey enemies and very, very repetitive. You sort of glide over and have to get the first punch in. You jab them repeatedly as you kind of walk them down. Rinse and repeat, rather crap looking, and the music's amusing, but also a bit crap. I actually like Last Action Hero. I think it's a fun movie. It came out at the same time as Jurassic Park, and being a big Arnie fan, I wanted that to be the big hit of the summer. It most definitely was not, but I still maintain that it was a better film than most people think it is. The game, though, is toss. Probably didn't help that there were 7 different versions of it on various platforms.
Don't give up your day job.
Cliffhanger is a beat-em-up / platform game released in '93 based on the film of the same name. Plane filled with terrorists attempting to steal money from a treasury plane while Airborne is shot down by an FBI plane. The terrorists survive and send out a distress signal to which the main character Gabe responds. However, Gabe does not know that the Mayday signal is coming from a group of terrorists, and after reaching them, the terrorists capture Gabe's partner Hal and hold him hostage. Gabe must then set out and retrieve the money in order to save Hal. In their review of the Super NES version, Electronic Gaming Monthly deemed the game a poor Double Dragon clone, citing a lack of originality, poor controls, tiresome gameplay, and below-average graphics. Reviewing the Sega CD version, GamePro criticised that the 5 platforming levels are repetitive to the point of monotony, praised the 2 snowboarding levels as extremely challenging and fun, and complained at the game being weighted more towards the platforming levels than the snowboarding levels. Christopher Michael Baker was heavily critical of the game, calling it one of the worst gaming experiences you'll ever encounter on any system. He criticised the graphics and controls and referred to it as a disgrace to video games. I mean, yes, it's pretty shit, but I think that's a bit hyperbolic, really. I was always more into Arnie than Sly as a kid. He's a member of Mensa, you know. But I did really enjoy Demolition Man, and I also quite enjoyed this one. Coat Hanger. Cliffhanger. I like John Lithgow, and although his appearance in this flick isn't nearly as good as his one in Santa Claus the Movie, for example, it's still good fun. Licensed movie gamers were notorious for their intense shittery back at this time, but I booted this one up and I was like, this is alright actually, man. The animations are quite nice, the graphics generally are quite nice also, it plays okay. At first, there is a bit of variety. In the levels, you have to moon jump your way over big crevasses. Is that the right word? Warm up your studly hands over a roaring campfire, climb up rocky bits while getting shit at, and then peg it down a hill, leaping into the air like a slanty-eyed Buzz Aldrin. Oh, bollocks. You know, this game is pretty fun, it's just the structure that kills it in my opinion. If you lose a continue here, you're sent all the way back to the beginning of the game, and yeah, you man, it's dreadful. Spider-Man and Venom Maximum Carnage is a beat-em-up released in 1994. The game received a sequel, Venom Spider-Man Separation Anxiety, in 95. Spider-Man, after an encounter with Shriek and Demogoblin, is wounded, but he is saved by Cloak and Dagger. Meanwhile, Vigilante Venom hears about the return of Carnage and returns to New York. He forms an uneasy alliance with Spider-Man in order to stop the monstrous Carnage. Realizing that stopping Carnage and the rest of his cronies will not be easy, Spider-Man also recruits a group of superheroes to help them. 67 based on 16 reviews. Ah yes, solid liberal advice for anyone entering the mental health professions here. Remember when games were fun but also made you think? The presentation is pretty strong here. The graphic and art style are nice, or at least they're distinctive and consistent anyway. Spider-Man has clearly been on the pies a bit here. He's a chunky monkey. In fact, speaking of monkeys, he's got tiny lower legs and massive great long arms like Clive the orangutan from Every Which Way But Loose. But hey, who cares? It's a pretty good looking game. The combat is very snappy indeed, and I really do like that. Some of it is poorly thought out though and rather irritating. This climbing bit here, for example, what's all this about? It needs some explanation. Moving on to the next one, Separation Anxiety. Well, it looks different. It's not better, but it's different. Unfortunately, you're dropped into another pretty uninspiring looking level that loops over and over every few yards, and you have to face off against wave upon wave of repetitive enemies who take too long to knock down, and it gives you that wading through treacle feeling right from the get-go. Yeah, it's just... I found it kind of boring, man, to be honest. This one got 58 based on 14 reviews. Meh. Toxic Crusaders is a beat-em-up game for the Sega Mega Drive based on the cartoon series of the same name, which is itself inspired, perhaps bizarrely, by the violent comedy horror The Toxic Avenger and its sequels. It was only released in North America. 52 based on 14 reviews. The 90s, a time when kids' franchises had to be either mutant or toxic or otherwise zany, outrageous. This is a prime example of that. It's an interesting one because it doesn't really play like any of the other games on this list. The closest thing I can probably come up with is Alien Storm, although this one is so fast it's almost like a shmup kinda, do you know what I mean? Is it fun? No, not particularly, but you know, it's alright, it's nice and colourful, and it's quite unusual. Cyborg Justice is a 1993 beat-em-up for the Sega Mega Drive by Nova Trade. A human astronaut crash lands on a planet and almost dies, but is rescued by robots who take his brain, implant it into a cyborg shell and try to erase it so that he can become their slave. Nice. But number 127's brain erase function fails. The game is a typical side-scrolling beat-em-up a la Golden Axe. A and B attack and C jumps. You can outfit the robot you play as with various different forms of limbs, each with their own advantages and attacks. This one has a Sega Retro score of 68. It has very nice animation. The combat is pretty fun and actually fairly complex. Palette swapping in the backgrounds is pretty cheap and it gets repetitive rather quickly. Unfortunately, it does feel pretty damn good in the hand though, and it has a pleasing weight and heft to it for a 2D game. 68 is about fair, I would say. Two Crude Dudes, that sounds vaguely obscene, doesn't it? Released in Asia as Crude Buster, that's not much better either, is it really? Is a 1990 beat-em-up arcade game developed and published by Data East. It was a follow-up to Bad Dudes vs. Dragon Ninja from 1988. The game was later ported to the Mega Drive/Genesis in 1992. In the game, players control one of two mercenaries hired by the American government to stop the terrorist organization Big Valley. Their objective is to retake control of a ruined New York City from Big Valley after a nuclear explosion the group caused. Kinda makes sense. The arcade game was critically acclaimed upon release. Writing for Computer and Video Games magazine, Julian Rignall called Crewbuster one of the best beat-em-ups I've seen in years and rated it 95%. Mark Caswell of Crash magazine called it a fun and humorous beat-em-up. Sinclair User, fucking hell that's old school, also noted the game's humour, comparing it to playing an interactive cartoon. They wrote that it was even better than other recent Data East games, including the game's predecessor. The magazine dubbed it a classic in terms of style and gameplay. The Mega Drive version was also well received. Mega magazine placed the game at number 37 in their top Mega Drive games of all time. Megatech magazine said it was the first Mega Drive beat-em-up that comes close to rivaling Streets of Rage. Fucking I don't know about that. I mean, it's okay. Yeah, this is, it has some really grotesque art design at times. I mean, it's kind of funny, it's so horrible. This praying mantis human thing here is just mental. It's supposed to be kind of funny, and it is, kind of. It's pretty tough, actually. I found it to have that kind of wading through treacle vibe, in that wave after wave of enemies come at you, and you progress rather slowly, and it's... yeah. I don't know, it's alright. Maybe I'm not giving it a fair run. Please correct me in the comments, but I didn't enjoy this one all that much, I'll be honest. Battletoads is a platform beat-em-up developed by Rare and published by Trade West. It was originally released in '91 for the Nintendo Entertainment System. It was subsequently ported to the Mega Drive and Game Gear in '93, to the Amiga and Amiga CD32 in '94, and released with some changes for the Game Boy in '93 in the form of Battletoads in Ragnarok's World. I hope you appreciate all this research I've done on Wikipedia. In the game, 3 space humanoid warrior toads form a group known as the Battletoads. The game is a platform-scrolling beat-em-up with varying elements of racing, climbing, and vehicle-based obstacle courses. Players start with 3 lives each time the game is started, which get replenished every time the player continues after getting defeated. Julian Rignall of Meme Machines wrote that it's brilliantly designed to allow you to get just a little bit further each time you play and give experts the potential to hone their skills and rack up enormous amounts of bonus points. Chris appreciated the simplicity of the controls of its multiple speciality moves, particularly how attacks triggered by the B button change between levels. The platforming bits, however, were criticised for having poor collision detection that results in cheap deaths. Reviewers from Sega Force also noted this problem in the Mega Drive port and called the game a run-of-the-mill platformer with unresponsive controls, random difficulty between levels, very few surprises, and menial objectives. I'm not really into this one, to be honest, but it's certainly not too bad. At first, the hit detection felt quite sloppy and floaty, and then I died and had to restart right from the beginning of the level, and I was like, fuck this, but I persevered and found it to have some redeeming features. Certainly, there's a nice bit of variety to the playstyles, and some, even though I don't particularly care for it, the art design is distinctive. The bike bit was a pain in the ass. I know this game has its fans. Perhaps if I spent more time with it, I would become one too, but I doubt it. Battletoads / Double Dragon is a 1993 beat-em-up developed by Rare and published by Trade West. It was originally released for the NES again and later pointed to the Mega Drive, Genesis, Super NES, and Game Boy. After she was defeated by the Battletoads, the evil Dark Queen flees to the outer reaches of the universe, and the Toads and their mentor get on with their lives. However, one day the Earth's military is neutral. Who cares about all this bollocks, really? Nintendo Power asserted that the game has confusing depth perception, but great action, graphics, and theme music make this one of the strongest titles this year. Other reviewers such as Electronic Gaming Monthly critic Martin Alesi and Mike Wiegand of Electronic Games found the visuals amazing for an 8-bit game, citing its parallax scrolling effects. Critics from GameFind called the SNES version superior to the Genesis version for its better presentation in colour, detail, effects, and sound. So, yeah, it's got some stuff going for it, I guess. The music's, sprite work looks crap compared to the top-tier stuff, in my opinion. The gameplay isn't too bad. I mean, I'd say it feels better than the other Mega Drive Double Dragons, but basically, I just found it rather tedious. Compared to something like Streets of Rage, it's just damn slow, visually crude, repetitive. The bosses are a piece of piss, at least early on. I sound like I'm being incredibly harsh here, but I'm just not really enamoured by the Battletoads world, to be honest with you. It's kind of rather uninspiring, and so is the art style. The music is... Oh, it's just boring, man. It's boring, alright? How else can I put it? The Death and Return of Superman is a side-scrolling beat-em-up for the SNES and Mega Drive, released in 1994, developed by Sunsoft. It's based on the Death of Superman comic book storyline by DC Comics and features many characters from the comics, including Superman himself, of course, Superboy, Steel, Cyborg Superman, the Eradicator, and Doomsday. All of the 5 Supermen are playable characters at some point. Wow, this has impressive graphics. I was quite taken aback at first. The animation is super duper smooth and the sprites are absolutely massive. I like this walking action from Superman here. I'd love to just stride around the kitchen at home like this, wearing my undies on top of my trousers. Cracks start to show as you play it for a bit, unfortunately. The enemies are repetitive in that there's a very small repertoire of them and you find yourself fighting the same ones over and over and over. There's also hardly ever more than 4 sprites on the screen at once, as far as I can see. Usually 3, actually. Presumably because they are so giant and have so many frames of animation. Yeah, but this one does feel good in the hand. The collision detection and everything feels pretty good. It's pretty satisfying, smashing people in the face. Not quite Streets of Rage satisfying, but decent nonetheless. I know nothing about comics, really. I've never really gotten into them, unfortunately, but isn't Superman unbelievably hard? I mean, he struggles a bit here with just these ordinary men at times, it seems. Are they, cybernetically enhanced men or something? Yep, I guess so, yeah. I don't know, man. It's an interesting one. Give it a whirl. Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, the movie for the Sega Mega Drive, is a beat-em-up game based on the film, if you will, of the same name. A giant purple egg has been unearthed at a construction site. Lord Zed, Rita Repulsa, and their henchmen arrive at the construction site and crack open the egg, releasing Ivan Ooze, a morphological being who ruled Earth 6,000 years ago before he was lured into a deep hyperlock chamber, and buried underground by Zordon and a group of young warriors. Ivan Ooze attacks the command center, incapacitating Zordon and robbing the Rangers of their powers. Zordon's assistant Alpha 5 sends the Rangers to the distant planet Phaedos to obtain the great power and save Zordon. What a load of shit. The game is a belt-scrolling beat-em-up in the mold of Double Dragon or Final Fight that can be played by one player or by two players simultaneously. Half the stages are based on a movie, but there are 3 flashbacks in the middle of the game that are based on episodes from the television series. In the stages based on the movie, players can choose the new red, black and yellow Rangers who play identically to their old counterparts. The Zords available for the end battles are the Ninja Megazord and Falcon Zord. Oh god. I couldn't stand this program when it was on the telly in the early mid-90s. Jesus Christ, it was fucking demented. I think I was slightly too old for it at the time, but then again, probably not, because I was like 9 or whatever, I think. Anyway, it was just batshit. I mean, the Turtles cartoon was pretty crap in retrospect too if you actually go back and rewatch it, but at least it had some appealing characters, some very mildly funny lines and original art design and stuff. It had a cool movie too, of course, but this, all I remember of this was that mental, badly dubbed Asian woman fucking cackling away and flinging her arms around everywhere.
Oh, I'm bored. I'll finish him off.
I'll do it!
Good.
And that mad floating head that looked like something out of Zardos, and it cuts so quick that you feel like you're going to have a seizure and start foaming at the mouth. Jolly Rancher juice leaking out of your nose. It was just so hyperbolic. No wonder we millennials were so mental watching stuff like this while hurling litres of Sunny D down our gullets. Good times, man. In all honesty, I really couldn't understand why this got so big. Anyway, sorry to any of you who do like this series, it's just my personal preference. Anyway, the game, you know, it's not bad actually. I chose to play as this pink one here because that's how I roll. It feels pretty good in the hand. It does slow down the pace of things for throwing so many waves of enemies at you, which does get frustrating at times, but the graphics are pretty decent, as is the animation. The music certainly has some drive and punch to it. You should certainly give this one a try if you are a fan of the TV series. I am not. DJ Boy is a 1989 beat-em-up arcade video game developed and published in Japan by Kaneko and in North America by Sammy. DJ Boy, also known as DJ Kid, was partially based on the hip-hop culture of US cities, apparently. Many of the characters ride around on roller skates rather than walking or running. The premise of the home console game. A young man named Donald J. Boy is a roller fighter taking part in an ultimate fight/race known as roller game, inverted commas. I didn't write this, by the way. Taking place in Cigarette City? What the fuck is this nonsense? Located on the outskirts of New York City. Many people were excited to see DJ Boy, but a roller fighter gang known as the Dark Knights want him out of the competition. Their leader, Heavy Met Tony, calls his gang to kidnap his girlfriend Maria, who also comes into town and defeats DJ Boy. DJ Boy must rescue Maria, defeat the Dark Knights, and win the roller game competition in one adventure. Some supreme Japlish there. In Japan, Game Magazine listed DJ Boy on their October 15, 1989 issue as being the 7th most successful table arcade unit of the month. In North America, it was the top-grossing software conversion kit on the Replay arcade charts in May 1990. Entertainment Weekly compared the US release to the Japanese version and wrote that DJ Boy still does battle with an enormous black woman, only here she's a few shades lighter and no longer has a fondness for flatulence. Make of that what you will. Rollerblades, yep. It's definitely the 1990s. Yeah, this is fairly fun in my book, and it looks okay. It scrolls very smoothly indeed, as you would expect from a Mega Drive game, but it has one critical flaw for me. When you die, it sends you back to the beginning of the level. That really gets on my wick. It's a personal pet peeve of mine. Collision detection feels okay, it's original, of course, or at least it has an original spin on an established genre. Yeah, having to restart the level every time you die though, nah, fuck off, man. Double Dragon is a beat-em-up by Technos, released for the arcades in 1987. It's considered a spiritual sequel to their previous hit, Renegade. The original arcade game was a blockbuster success and established a number of conventions that would define the beat-em-up genre, serving as a precursor to the later games in the genre such as Final Fight and Streets of Rage. The game was ported to several consoles and home computers after its original arcade release, including to Sega consoles twice, the first time for Master System by Sega themselves in '88 and later for the Genesis in '92 by Accolade. The game is of course a belt-scrolling beat-em-up played as one or both of the Lee brothers. It can be started as a two-player game or another player can join during gameplay by pressing start. This particular version has a score of 57 based on 22 reviews. It's not great, man. It takes absolutely ages to knock people out and it quickly becomes a bit of a slog. I did like the Master System version of this one back in the day as a little kid, well, an infant pretty much, thinking about it, but that was a very, very long time ago indeed, before the Mega Drive had arrived, before I played Streets of Rage or anything like that. I like this bit of clanger-style slide whistle when the boss turns up. It feels very rudimentary indeed compared to Streets of Rage. I mean, that's a high bar, admittedly. And I know, of course, this set up a lot of the conventions that Streets of Rage built upon, and that it's a complete arcade classic, of course. Well, this is true, but let's try and look at it objectively. It was superseded on this very console, and it's just not so easy going back sometimes.
Power up. Power up.
Altered Beast. Is this a scrolling beat-em-up? Yeah, it kind of is, I suppose. This one was originally released in 1998 by Sega in arcades. The game is set in ancient Greece and follows a player character chosen by Zeus to rescue his daughter Athena from the demonic ruler of the underworld, Neph. By collecting 3 power-ups in a level, the player character transforms into one of 5 magical beasts. It was ported to several home video game consoles and home computers. Altered Beast was the pack-in game where the Genesis launched in North America and the Mega Drive in Europe. Indeed, I remember all early adopters of this game having it back in the day when I was very small indeed, about 4 or 5 years old, I think. This game was developed by Makoto Uchida. I've pronounced that incorrectly, I do apologise. He took inspiration for the game from The Howling and the music video for the Michael Jackson song Thriller, as well as movies by Ray Harryhausen, and chose the Greek setting for the powerful characters he had in mind. Uchida admitted that he struggled during production because it was the first game he'd ever developed, and so he leaned on his lead programmer to help create balance in the gameplay. One of Uchida's goals was to create flashy visuals that would surprise players, so he asked his lead artist to focus just on the player character's transformation sequences for 1 month. Additionally, he and his team used the System 16 arcade system board for its ability to add great detail to large character sprites, as well as the visual effects it could provide, such as limbs flying off characters during combat. Lovely stuff. This game was a very big deal early on in the Mega Drive era. Everyone seemed to have a copy of this, and the graphics and sound were very impressive indeed for the time. Wise from your grave. I can't say I've ever really enjoyed it though, to be honest with you. Is it a beat 'em up? I mean, yeah. I find it kind of fiddly and you die quite often, and I've never found it all that enjoyable. To me, this one is more kind of iconic and graphically impressive, certainly at the time, than genuinely great, I would say. Still, I hold nothing against the game, and I know it has many, many fans, so maybe you should get off your ass and go and play Altered Beast.
Power up! Power up! Rise from your grave.
Double Dragon 3 The Rosetta Stone is a side-scrolling beat-em-up arcade game produced by Technos? I don't fucking know, Japan in 1990. It is the third arcade game in the Double Dragon series, of course. Unlike the previous 2 games in the series, Double Dragon 3 was not developed internally at Technos, I really need to read how to pronounce that word, but development was instead contracted to the company East Technology, resulting in a game that looks and plays differently from its predecessors. As in the previous games of the series, players control twin martial artists Billy and Jimmy Lee, as they are approached by a mysterious fortune teller named Hiroko, who sends them on a worldwide journey to retrieve 3 mystical Rosetta Stones and uncover the mysteries surrounding them in Egypt. This game is not great by any stretch, in my opinion, but it is frequently hilarious, and that can only be a good thing, of course. This bit here, for example, where E.T. comes on the screen and tries to order you about, then Jerry Garcia comes flying at you on a motorcycle.
Come here, Uncle John's man.
Even Dolph Lundgren here can't keep the pace.
You're up for a court-martial.
I like the globe-trotting vibe of this game and the full-blooded 80s action movie vibes, of course. Admittedly, I'm really shit at the game, but to me it seems impossible to not get absolutely battered at very regular intervals. Like the Homer Simpson of 80s action movies, you plod around from continent to continent, getting smashed in the face and beating your opponents by way of sheer attrition in the mother of all Pyrrhic victories. It's magical stuff. There's some preposterous racial stereotypes in the best possible way, of course. Look at these, Italians here. Why the fuck are they all blonde? I think this is an ancient Rome thing, even though it looks more Greek to me. It's Japanese, isn't it? Doesn't have to make sense. You know, it isn't very good, but I just can't help liking this one. And I think you'll have some fun with it too.
It's empty!
Splatterhouse 2, known in Japan as Splatterhouse Part 2, thanks for that, is a beat-em-up video game developed by Now Productions and published by Namco for the Sega Genesis in 1992. It's the sequel to Splatterhouse, of course, as well as the third installment of the Splatterhouse video game series, following Splatterhouse Wampaku Graffiti. Same to you. 3 months have gone by since the events of the first game, whatever they were. Rick is still suffering from his guilt of being unable to save Jennifer and has been plagued by nightmares of her and the Terror Mask, which reformed after breaking at the climax of the first game. Suddenly, the mask reappears to Rick and tempts him to find the house, telling him that Jennifer can be saved. It closes by telling Rick that it will give him power. Japlish again here, sorry. Rick succeeds in rescuing Jennifer and the house sinks into the bottom of a river. Sorry, I've just spoiled the plot for you there, haven't I? Splatterhouse 2 features gameplay very similar to the first game. The player controls Rick through 8 different stages. His attacks remain largely unchanged. He's able to punch, kick, jump kick, and slide kick, as well as use several weapons scattered throughout the levels. Each level features a boss at the end, often a grotesque monster. Game Informer praised the game, saying that Splatterhouse 2 was definitely one not to pass up. Bit of an awkward sentence. Abby Normal of GamePro stated that if you've ever wanted to seek revenge on all those early childhood closet monsters, now is your chance to do it, vicariously through Splatterhouse 2. Many, however, were quick to point out that a great game premise wasn't enough to carry a game. Sega Force called the controls sluggish and suggests the gameplay lets the whole game down. Video Games and Computer Entertainment agreed, arguing that Splatterhouse 2 does nothing to advance the genre. Mean Machines Sega also noted the poor graphics and short single-player campaign. The 4 reviewers of Megaplay gave positive reviews, noting the blood and gore gameplay being one of the best points of the game, and felt that the game would appeal to horror movie fans. Indeed, the grisly horror aesthetic is not something I'm really into, generally speaking, to be honest, although there's definitely a few exceptions here and there, but still I think this game is very nicely presented, particularly the intro here. It's really cool. It looks good, quite a cinematic take really for a game of this vintage. Good stuff. The game itself, Yeah, I mean, like a lot of horror games, I find this one gross and a bit depressing, and that's exactly what it's supposed to do. So I can't really criticize it for that, can I? You can actually punch someone about a yard away from their face and still register a hit, which is kind of not very good on the face of it, but actually I was quite happy that it was nice and easy. There's some big, cool, chunky and disgusting sprite work, and there's a lot of imagination in the art design. I did find it kind of a chore, to be honest, overall, kind of like wading through treacle again. Obviously it's supposed to be kind of ponderous because you're playing this big slugger Jason Voorhees type, so you're not exactly going to be moving around the screen like Shinobi, are you? But still, it's slow and ponderous. I know this one is highly regarded, and I agree, it's a decent game with some standout elements, but it's just not my cup of tea personally. I don't put it in the upper echelons of this list. Mystical Fighter, originally released in Japan as Maurinjishi. Mystical Fighter is a beat-em-up game for the Mega Drive. The story, designs, and characters are based on Japanese mythology. Like in most games of the genre, the player who controls a kabuki can use combos, flips, and swings to fight against tough opponents, fighting them in groups from 3 to 5. Surprisingly, boss fights are often easier than regular enemies. There is also a time limit, usually about 40 seconds for the player to finish the stage. If the time reaches 0 before the player passes the stage, the player will automatically lose the game, as it will be declared a defeat. There are hidden bonus stages that can be accessed if the player approaches certain doors or rooms, blah 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 blah. It's okay, it's pretty interesting actually. It's samurai and demons and whatnot. It does get rather repetitive, but it's certainly got some snap to it in the combat. I quite enjoyed it. I thought it felt good in the hand. The graphics are, I wouldn't call them good exactly, but the art design is certainly very interesting. It has an unusual vibe in a good way. The Mega Drive aficionado should definitely check this one out. I remember Captain Planet being on CBBC as a kid, and I always thought it was lame, but I wouldn't hold that against this game. I started playing it and I was like, this isn't a fucking beat 'em up, and thankfully I realised I had the wrong game altogether, and it was actually Captain America that I needed, which was nice. Let's just start this whole section again, shall we? Captain America and the Avengers is a beat-em-up arcade game developed and released by Data East in 1991. It features the Avengers team of Marvel Comics characters in a side-scrolling, brawling, and shooting adventure to defeat the evil Red Skull. Players can choose to play as one of 4 members of the Avengers: Captain America, Iron Man, Hawkeye, and Vision. Each character can fight hand-to-hand, throw items, and use a ranged special attack, either a projectile weapon or an energy beam. In the US, it topped the Replay Arcade earnings charts for upright arcade cabinets in November 1991. In Japan, Game Machine listed Captain America and the Avengers on their January 1st, 1992 issue as being the 4th most successful table arcade unit of the month. So, how's this one then? I've never been into Marvel, to be honest with you. I always found it a bit uninteresting for whatever reason, but I came into this with an open mind. I was unimpressed at first because of the rather basic graphics and animation, but also by the apparently 30 frames per second update, which, coupled with the low number of frames and fast movement of the characters, gives the whole thing a bit of a juddery feel. I spent a little bit of time with it though, and I found it to be pretty decent. I think the best thing about this game is the variety in the stages and the transitions between them, which is absolutely key to a successful beat-em-up in my opinion. It has a globe-trotting vibe to it, and it tries and succeeds in taking you on a little journey, a quest, a fellowship. In my opinion, all the best beat-em-ups pull off this trick, and this isn't one of them, but it's okay. It's alright. If I'd been a Marvel fan back then, I think I would have been pretty fond of this one. It's got all of your Marvel-y, Avengers-y people and whatnot. Probably my favourite bit was actually the 2D shooter sections, which it probably shouldn't be really, and the beat-em-up gameplay is not great, but you adjust to it. It's not bad. It's not bad at all. Splatterhouse 3, known in Japan as Splatterhouse Part 3, thanks again for that, is a horror-themed beat-em-up video game released by Namco for the Mega Drive / Genesis in '93. It's the sequel to Splatterhouse 2, and was one of the first games to be given a rating by Sega's own Video Game Rating Council. In North America, the game was given an MA13 rating by the council for its graphic violence and gore. Unlike its predecessors, it was not originally released in Europe. The game takes place about 5 years after the events of Splatterhouse 2. Rick and Jennifer have since married and have a son named David. Rick has also become successful on Wall Street. Of course, I can see him sitting in an office there next to Michael Douglas with a cigar in his mouth and some red braces on. He's also bought a mansion in Connecticut, putting the memories of the terror mask behind him. Well, he's done well for himself, hasn't he? Meanwhile, the mask fills the ancient energy that it recalls from ages past and begins to speak to Rick. Rick must don the mask for the 3rd time and fight the monsters that have invaded his mansion. In a review of Splatterhouse 3, Fangoria wrote that the appeal of the Splatterhouse games is the bloody violence. Its graphics are explicit and gross, but in an over-the-top way. Splatterhouse 3 adds more play elements in the form of a map, time limits, and multiple endings, but it all boils down to cartoon violence taken to the extreme. All game editor Jeffrey Douglas Smith praised Splatterhouse 3, stating that the game stands at the top of the beat-em-up heap on Genesis. I don't agree with that. A fun and gory ride with plenty of enemies to pummel and a solid game engine makes this a blast to play. Yeah, I did like this one better than Splatterhouse 2 because you can, move and shit. Your character is much more nimble and it's just more fun to play. It does get repetitive. I mean, all these games are repetitive, aren't they, really? But in many of the better ones, you get changes of scene and vibe or slightly different gameplay styles, and that helps to keep it fresh, But, yeah, it's a pretty good game, but it doesn't scratch the top 10 for me. Growl, known in Japan as Runark, I think, is a belt-scrolling beat-em-up originally released for the arcades by Taito in 1990. Set in the early 20th century, the player controls a forest ranger who must protect the local wildlife from a group of evil poachers who are driving the animals to extinction. A home version was released for the Sega Genesis / Mega Drive in November 1991. In Japan, Game Machine listed Growl on their March 15, 1991 issue as being the second most successful table arcade unit of the month. The Genesis port of Growl can only be played by a single player, unfortunately, although all 4 characters are present and are given individual names: Gen, Burn, Khan, and Jack. The controls are identical to the arcade version. The player's special attacks can now be performed at any time, but now they drain a bit of the player's health. Instead of recovering health in between stages, the player recovers his health by picking up apples hidden inside certain crates. The cavern stage was also redesigned completely. Finally, the M16 has been replaced with an AK-47. Wow, getting right into the deets here, folks. So yeah, it's not too well known, this one, is it? But I really quite enjoyed it, actually. It's Indiana Jones. If they gave Indy a rocket launcher, that ballroom scene in Temple of Doom might have played out a bit differently, eh? Yeah, it's a fun game with a unique vibe. The hit detection is a bit hit and miss, no pun intended. You get used to it, though. It has an enjoyable theme. I like these eagles, or whatever they are, who help you out and stuff mid-battle. This is not top tier by any stretch, but it's a fun and interesting curio with a very distinctive style and some ludicrous weaponry to play with. Very entertaining, for sure. Give it a try if you hadn't already.
Don't call me Junior.
Comix Zone is a 1995 beat-em-up video game developed and published by Sega for the Genesis/Mega Drive. It is set within the panels of a comic book with dialogue rendered within talk bubbles and sprites and backgrounds possessing the bright colours and dynamic drawing style of superhero comics. Whew. This style is in previous video games, for example Ocean Software's Batman the Caped Crusader in 1988, but Comix Zone stretched the idea to such an extent that Sega applied for and was granted a patent for a video game system for creating a simulated comic book game. The concept for the game originated from a 1992 demo video for the Amiga titled Joe Pencil Trapped in the Comix Zone, animated by Peter, I don't know how to pronounce that name, Morawiecki, I think. It explores how the gameplay and the comic book elements would blend in. It's an action platformer in which players control Sketch as he progresses through panels in his comic book, hoping to reach the end and escape before his own creations finish him off. GamePro considered the game's visuals a successful recreation of the look and feel of a comic book, said that the gameplay quickly sours once the player encounters the repetitive combat and overly simplistic puzzles. They also found problems with the controls, concluding that you really want to love Comix Zone for its original elements, but after a few panels the honeymoon is over. Yeah, that would be more or less my take. This one looks absolutely amazing. It has stunning animation, one of the best looking games on Mega Drive without a shadow of a doubt. It plays pretty well too. It's satisfying, chunky, weighty combat with just a little bit of complexity to it. I really don't like the way you have to restart the level though when you die. That mechanic always puts me off. I'm sure it's my problem and I should deal with it really, but I just have an intense dislike of repetition. Yeah, it's a very high quality game and you have to applaud it really, but I just for some unfathomable reason don't find it terribly enjoyable to play. Your mileage will vary, I'm sure. Sailor Moon is a side-scrolling beat-em-up developed and released by Angel in Japan on August 27th, 1993. It's the second Angel game based on Sailor Moon, and one of the few Sailor Moon titles that had an official international release. Following the first season of the anime series, which adapted the first arc of the manga, the players control one of the 5 original Inner Sailor Guardians and fight against enemies across several locations in order to protect Earth from the Dark Kingdom. A group of antagonists led by Queen Beryl, who previously destroyed the ancient Moon Kingdom as they attempt to steal life energy from humans and the Silver Crystal to free Queen Materia from her imprisonment. Mataria. Blah 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 blah. Sailor Moon was met with mixed reception from critics since its release on both SNES and Mega Drive. It's a fairly nuts and bolts side-scrolling beat-em-up. You take control of one of the original Sailor soldiers across various stages, each one set in a different location, and fight against an assortment of enemies and villains. Readers of the Japanese Sega Saturn magazine voted to give the Mega Drive port a 6 out of 10, ranking it at the number 337 spot in a poll, indicating a popular following. Doesn't sound that high to me. Upon reviewing the Mega Drive version, Animerica found its graphics to be better than the previous Sailor Moon titles on SNES. Mega Console's Pierre Franco Merenda and Fabio Massa were also positive about this version, praising the audio-visual presentation and longevity, but felt mixed in regards to its playability. I don't really agree with these people. Every time I do one of these big lists, I come across at least one game that is a genuinely pleasant surprise. This is one such game. I'm kinda girly in the way that I like bright, colourful, shiny things like this.
Protection, prestige, and pretty.
This game is consistently a treat to look at. It's very colourful and poppy with great big giant sprites. There's a huge amount of variety and imagination in the stages, and in fact the backdrops alone were enough to push me through each level. I loved its globe-trotting feel, and I wanted to press on just to see what I could see in the next stage. The flow of every good scrolling beat-em-up is most definitely here, in my opinion. The gameplay is serviceable, it's perfectly fine in my book. It's not big, it's not clever, but it doesn't do anything particularly wrong either. It's entirely fit for purpose, and the game is gorgeous. Yeah, it's good. I really like it. You should absolutely give this one a whirl.
It's good, you should try it.
The Punisher is a beat-em-up game for the Mega Drive based on the comic book series with the same name. It's a port of the '93 arcade game of the same title by Capcom. US Marine Captain Frank Castle enjoys a picnic with his family in Central Park. The Castle family accidentally discovered a mob killing, fearing any witnesses the killers gun down the family. To avenge them and all others like them, Frank becomes vigilante the Punisher. The game's a side-scrolling beat-em-up, of course, similar to Final Fight. The game can be played either as the Punisher or Nick Fury, and with 1 or 2 players. It received 57 based on 19 reviews, and I think that's rather harsh. The graphics are not very good, really. The colour palette seems particularly limited here and kind of anemic looking, you know? And the animation isn't great either, but this is a good game, I would say, nonetheless. It plays nicely. The speed and breeziness of the combat and the variety and sense of imagination in the environments and scenarios is great, and it all rattles along at a good old pace. I love this bit where the T-800 endoskeleton comes lumbering over to you. He's got rubber gloves on there for some reason, fresh from doing the washing up, presumably. Hashtag Fairy Liquid Terminator.
With mild green fairy liquid.
Yeah, it feels really good leathering people. What can I say? I'm not a big comic book fan, although I've got nothing against them by any means. But yeah, you can't help but be drawn in by this game. The music is a bit lo-fi, but there's certainly some good tunes in there, and it gives the whole thing an appropriate sense of urgency. Yeah, it's good, man. The only thing holding it back a little bit is elements of the presentation, I think, specifically the graphics and animation, and the music's a little bit too, well, compared to Streets of Rage, its presentation is a bit tepid. It offers an appropriate level of challenge, but it also does a great job of making you feel like the Punisher, barreling forward and smashing the shit out of thugs in the most brutal way possible. In fact, this train level here is exactly what I would like to do to Northern Rail staff and management when another one of my services gets cancelled for no good reason whatsoever and I end up late for fucking work again. Little bit of politics. Good game, man. It's a good game. Oh, and just a little shout out to this half-tank, half-steroid-addled grandma from the Golden Girls. This is just magnificent stuff here. Look at this. Oh, that's gotta hurt. Golden Axe 3 is a side-scrolling beat-em-up video game developed and published by Sega, released for the Mega Drive in 1993. It's a sequel to Golden Axe 2, thanks for that. A North American version was released only for the Sega channel. Damud Hellstrike, I think that's his name, the Prince of Darkness, has taken away the Golden Axe and put an evil curse over all the warriors. However, one of the heroes has their curse relieved and is sent to set things straight. Lift the curse off the others, defeat the villain, and return with the Golden Axe. The gameplay has been expanded slightly, but is essentially the same hack and slash as the previous games. New features to the series include new characters, new moves, and junction points where the player can choose which path to take. The 5 characters include a giant, proud Kragger, a humanoid Black Panther, Kronos, along with a swordsman, Kane Grinder, that sounds absolutely revolting, who resembles Axe Battler, and a swordsman, Sarah Byrne, who resembles Tyrus Flare. Gilius Thunderhead is the only character who appears from previous games, though he isn't playable and only appears during cutscenes. Kane Grinder and Sarah Byrne are referred to as Axe Battler and Tyrus Flare respectively in the Sega Channel localization of the game, apparently. In a feature on the game, Electronic Gaming Monthly commented, "Sega of Japan is not going to release this title here in the States, and for good reason. The graphics are by far some of the most plain looking on the Mega Drive, plus the new magic effects aren't as impressive as before. So if you are considering purchasing this title from an overseas seller, don't waste your bucks." IGN gave the Virtual Console release a 5 out of 10, saying, "Legend has it that Sega thought the quality of this product was so low that it would be worthless or worse damaging to even publish the game in the States. And whether or not that's actually true, the quality assessment at its heart is on target, because Golden Axe 3 is certainly the worst of its franchise trilogy." Yeah, I don't think it's quite as bad as all that, to be honest. It's an interesting one. I didn't actually play this one until about 10 years ago or so. It wasn't released here after all back in the day. Yeah, I was pretty put off by the graphics at first, which are really scrappy and grainy compared to the first 2 games. I don't think the sprite work and the use of colour here is particularly attractive. The gameplay though is pretty cool. There's quite a bit of additional complexity here over the first 2 games. I also like the variety in the stages and the multiple routes through them. It is balls hard. It had me tearing my hair out towards the end of the game, but I did manage to finish it. In fact, my wife finished it for me, believe it or not. That's almost a shame to admit that, really, but you should certainly give this one a try. They were trying to push the envelope with the format a little bit, and it certainly deserves to be experienced. Alien Storm is a beat-em-up/shooter, apparently released as an arcade video game by Sega in 1990. It was ported to the Genesis/Mega Drive and Master System. A homicidal alien race is invading Earth, and the only thing that stands between them and world domination are a special forces team known as the Alien Busters, composed of Karen, yes Karen, Garth, and Scooter. Some really intimidating names there. I'm sure the aliens are shitting themselves. Alien Storm is a side-scrolling beat-em-up. The game resembles Golden Axe with a similar artistic style. Yeah, I suppose so. Up to 2 players on the Mega Drive version. Select from one of 3 different characters to embark upon a quest to save the Earth from an alien invasion. All of the busters are playable from the beginning of the game. There are 6 missions to complete, 8 in the Mega Drive version with several stages, and each mission has the player blasting aliens from the street to the mothership where the mother of all aliens can be found. This task becomes increasingly difficult with each new mission, and the aliens are capable of hiding inside objects such as plants, postboxes, trash cans, drums, and other items. Each mission has an objective such as rescuing people or destroying a UFO. Ah yes, commit retail genocide in this classic right-wing beat-em-up from Sega. No CRT television, small screaming child, or bag of potato chips is safe with you and your American gladiator pals around, and if you take a mild dislike to something, simply drop a nuke on its head. Problem solved. I used to rent this one out from the video rental place in my little hometown. Ah, those were the days. Channel 40 in Northwich, Cheshire, England. The smell of cheap perfume, popcorn and cigarettes, legions of Jean-Claude Van Damme VHS tapes and Mega Drive clamshell boxes, a seedy tattoo parlour upstairs and a faint aura of musky dread. Ah, the 90s. Sorry I'm rambling. This one's fun. It's very fun. It always has been fun. It always will be fun. But is it at the top of the list? Not quite, but it's certainly getting up there. Give it a try, and give it a try in 2-player mode. You know, sitting next to someone on a couch. That's the way to play these things. Yes! Amazing Saga Mutant Fighter is a 1993 hybrid beat-em-up developed by Almanic Corporation in conjunction with ALU and Team Saga, and published by Vic Tokai for the Sega Genesis in North America and later in Japan and Europe by Sega. Based upon Go Nagai's Amazing Saga Mecha manga, which is considered a combination of Nagai's Mazinger and Devilman franchises, players assume the role of Koji Kabuto, wielding the Mazinger Z armor, I'll say Z, because, you know, to fight against powerful bio-beasts led by God Kaiser Hell. Co-directed by Satsuki Mizuno, Takashi Yoneda, and Tommy Bonbon. What the fuck am I even saying at this point? The title was created by most of the same team that worked on previous projects at Almanic, such as Evo's Search for Eden. I think that's the most incomprehensible paragraph I've ever read out. It was met with a mostly positive reception from critics. Megatech gave the game 90% and a Hyper Game Award, whatever that means. Mega gave the game 65%, saying that it was not as good as Streets of Rage 2. I'd have to agree with that statement, but it's not really saying much, is it? This one has excellent, truly arcade-like animation that really impressed me right from the off. There are tons of frames of animation and everything looks super smooth. It's also a bread and butter beat-em-up at its root at least, which I appreciate. A button special, B button attack, and C to jump. Yeah, I sunk right into this one immediately. The graphics are excellent, some gigantic sprites here, great performance, and lots of detail. The art style is imaginative, but it's perhaps not to my taste entirely. It's a little bit on the garish side. For me, I can't say I'm a fan of the music either, really. It's kind of discordant and a bit stress-inducing, which was probably exactly what they were going for, of course, but hey, it's just not quite for me. Regardless, this is an excellent game in my opinion, one of the best on the Mega Drive I would say, and I highly recommend that any Mega Drive/Genesis owners give this a try immediately if you haven't already. Teenage Mutant Ninja Hero Turtles The Hyperstone Heist is a 1992 side-scrolling beat-em-up game based on the Ninja Turtles comic book characters, of course. April O'Neil is reporting from Liberty Island when in a sudden flash of light she and her audience witness Manhattan Island suddenly starting to shrink. Shredder then hijacks the airwaves and announces to the world that this was only a demonstration of the power of the Hyperstone, the treasure of Dimension X. That sounds like a club I went to once, give a shit. With the Hyperstone in his possession, he now has the power to take over the world. The Turtles have no choice but to go after Shredder and stop him. The gameplay is based heavily on the second Turtles arcade game, Turtles in Time, which was ported to the Super NES during the same year. The controls are similar to Turtles in Time, but the ability to dash is assigned to a specific button and the player can't throw enemies towards the screen. Hyperstone Heist has a more aggressive enemy AI and faster moving gameplay. There are a total of 5 levels: New York City, a mysterious ghost ship, Shredder's hideout, the Gauntlet, and the final Shell Shock, which comprise a combination of new levels created specifically for this game and ones based on levels from the first arcade game and Turtles in Time. The game received positive reviews upon release. In Game Fan magazine, Dave Halverson said, "Konami brings the arcade thrill home with a beat-em-up blast a minute. What? That has some of the best character animation you'll ever see. Insomniac, wow, digging these 90s names.
Yo, I'm blowing up. It's Kate, Grand Central. Let's hit it!
Called it a 16-bit graphic and game-playing work of art and said it brings excellent arcade-quality graphics, sound gameplay to your home unit. Yeah, this game is pretty good, as you might imagine, really. Decent graphics and music, although certainly not top tier in my book. Nice imitation slap bass here, I like that. I did find it rather repetitive compared to something like Streets of Rage, and I understand it's not quite as good as the SNES version, although I must confess I've never played that one, so make of that what you will. I was a big Turtles fan back in the day, but for some reason I didn't have this game. I was much more familiar with Turtles Tournament Fighters, and that one was, you know, mildly diverting, not bad at all. Anyway, it's good, indeed, but it's not quite good enough to top this list. Absolutely give this one a go though, especially if you are a fan of the Turtles. Golden Axe 2 is a side-scrolling beat-em-up video game developed and published by Sega, first released on the Mega Drive in December 1991. It is the home console sequel to the popular game Golden Axe, marking the second game in the series, though the arcade did see an interquel of its own in 1992 titled Golden Axe: The Revenge of Death Adder. Golden Axe 2 was only released on the Mega Drive, while the original was released on many other platforms. The three playable characters from the first Golden Axe, Axe Battler, Tyrus Flare, and Gilius Thunderhead, return in Golden Axe 2 to save the people of the land from a new clan of evil warriors and their lord Dark Gold, and reclaim from him the legendary Golden Axe. The game features a total of 7 levels, 6 scrolling levels, and a final end-of-game boss battle against Dark Gold. Though the characters and gameplay were virtually unchanged from the first game, there were a few improvements. The back attack, performed by pressing the jump and attack buttons simultaneously for each character, was changed to a more useful attack that hit enemies on all sides. Enemies could now be thrown in either direction by pressing right or left on the D-pad immediately after picking them up, making it easier to hit other enemies with them or throw them off cliffs. Yes. Most importantly, the magic system was overhauled. Whereas in the first game, pressing the magic button used all of a player's magic pots, one could now use part or all of one's magic by holding the button and releasing it when the meter had reached the desired level. I absolutely love the original Golden Axe, but for some reason I've just never quite liked this one as much. I think a lot of it was the intro music, weirdly. Listen to this. I just always thought that was daft. I mean, it's funny, but it's just bollocks. Anyway, the game itself is good, as you would expect. It just doesn't have as many standout, memorable moments or locations as the first game. For me, there's absolutely nothing wrong with it, of course. In fact, it's very good, but it just doesn't pique my imagination in quite the same way. If you haven't played it though, stop what you are doing right now and smash your way through it. It's a damn good time, and certainly in the upper echelons of Sega Mega Drive beat-em-ups. Streets of Rage 3 is a side-scrolling beat-em-up developed and published by Sega in 1994 for the Genesis/Mega Drive. It is the third installment of the Streets of Rage series and the last game in the original trilogy. The game includes several changes over Streets of Rage and Streets of Rage 2, such as a more complex plot, inclusion of character dialogue, longer levels, more in-depth scenarios, and faster gameplay. Weapons can be integrated with unique moves with certain characters, hidden characters were added, and a few cutscenes were included to give the story greater depth. Several tweaks have been made to the gameplay following Streets of Rage 2, whereas only Skate was able to run in the previous game. Now each character is able to sprint as well as perform a vertical dodge roll. Blitz attacks can be upgraded through successive play, and a rechargeable meter allows players to perform a special attack without losing any health when full. GamePro commented that the game is little different from previous entries in the series, but praised the new moves and support for the 6-button controller. The 4 reviewers of Electronic Gaming Monthly praised the new moves and larger levels, though 2 of them criticised that the soundtrack was well below Yuzo Koshiro's usual standard. More on that later. Mean Machine Sega said the game had easily outdone the graphics of the first 2 Streets of Rage games due to the larger sprites, but had failed to significantly advance the gameplay of the series. They concluded it to be overall fun and playable, albeit too easy. GameFan praised the gameplay and graphics but took exception to the localization, saying it neutered an otherwise fine title, advising readers to import the Japanese version or pass it up entirely. They were also very critical of the music. So I didn't actually play this one until relatively recently, probably about 10 or 15 years ago. I'd missed it completely at the time. I used to buy the official Sega magazine before it became the official Saturn magazine way back in the mid-90s, and as I remember it, there was weirdly little fanfare for this game until it just sort of popped up on the front cover one month. I read the review, it got 83% in there if I remember correctly. Not quite sure why I remember a review score from a gaming magazine from 1994. Sometimes I wish I could remember useful things like my niece's birthdays, for example, but hey, it just refuses to stay in there. What can I do about it? Anyway, yeah, people were a little mixed on this game. My first experience of it was with the Japanese version, Bare Knuckle 3, that I bought on eBay before it became ludicrously expensive. In the Japanese original, Axel has his traditional white t-shirt on instead of the weird yellow top they put him in the Western version. Why the fuck did they do that? There must be a reason. There are lots of other little changes too. The original Japanese version is considered to be the superior version. To be honest, I thought it was really good. They were really trying to push the envelope here, and I appreciate that, even though some of these changes don't quite work. The music, for example, among many other genres, I like listening to at times almost atonal electronic music like Aphex Twin and Ortekra and stuff like that, and to me the music in Streets of Rage 3 is absolutely amazing, albeit not the kind of thing you'd put on at a house party, do you know what I mean? Unless it was a proper fucking horrible house party where you all sit around smashing ketamine in your underwear eating bags of crisps. What? In fact, the soundtrack is absolutely mesmerizing at times, one of the most unique, ambitious and experimental game soundtracks ever made. Datadiscs, who make those lovely Mega Drive and Sega vinyls, for example, wrote this about the soundtrack. Similar to the task of condensing Yuzo Koshiro and Motohiro Kawashima's abundance of ideas into a Mega Drive cartridge in 1994, it feels almost impossible to convey the influences, technical achievements and sheer ambition of their masterpiece in a single paragraph today. By combining automatic composition methods, custom programming languages and a complete sense of artistic freedom, Koshiro and Kawashima transcended their medium and created something so incomparable that it's hard to believe it came from any games console, let alone a 16-bit one. Streets of Rage 3 is urgent, demanding, and a complete rejection of the notion that video game music is either pedestrian or predictable. We are honoured to be releasing it. This is from the soundtrack, of course. Stories, you know, they were trying to add a layer of depth to the proceedings, and I appreciate that, even though I kind of prefer it not having a story, or at least I prefer the approach of the first 2 games where you're just presented with a location or a scenario and you just kind of use your imagination to determine what's actually going on, or just don't do that whatsoever and enjoy smashing people straight in the face. But I still appreciate the effort. How do I put it? The tone of this one is a little bit too hyperbolic and comic book-like for me in terms of its art style and its bosses and stuff like that. Just a little bit too much. You know, with the kangaroos and the mad robot arms and all that kind of stuff. I mean, it's not a criticism as such, it's just I personally prefer the very slightly more grounded vibe of the first 2 games. The multiple route thing, where it can ruin your game if you choose the wrong path, is, yeah, kind of annoying, to be honest with you. I might recommend, unless you've memorized it already, of course, using a guide to make sure that doesn't happen to you. So it's kind of uneven overall, but still, it's an excellent game by any conceivable metric, and one you simply must play through. Do it in 2-player mode also, if you're able to, of course. Golden Axe is a side-scrolling hack-and-slash video game released by Sega for arcades in 1989, running on the Sega System 16B arcade hardware. Makoto Uchida was the lead designer of the game and was also responsible for the creation of the previous year's Altered Beast. The game casts players as one of three warriors who must free the fantastical land of Uria from the tyrannical rule of Death Adder, who wields the titular Golden Axe. The game was well received at the time of release. Golden Axe was later converted for play on many different home systems, including Sega's own Mega Drive and Master System. The game's success spawned an entire franchise consisting of several sequels and various spin-offs. Progress is made through the game by fighting through Death Adder's henchmen, including men armed with clubs and maces, skeleton warriors, and knights. Players are able to attack using their weapon, jump and cast spells that hurt all enemies on the screen. The force of this magic depends on the number of bars of magic power currently available. The bars are filled by collecting blue magic potions attained by kicking little sprites who then drop the potions. These sprites appear during regular levels and during bonus stages in between levels. The male warrior Axe Battler is able to cast earth spells. The dwarf Gilius casts lightning spells, and the female warrior Tyrus Flare casts fire magic. The Mega Drive version remained largely faithful to the arcade game, adding a level and a duel mode, along with a new ending. Fuck off. Yes. I don't know about you, but after a hard day leathering skeletons, midgets, and lime green wenches, I like to roast my ankles in a crackling campfire. Ah, yes. Always love this little trump noise the dwarfs make here. I guess it's a sound effect messing up or something. I love the little AI exploits you can do here. Ah, you wee fucker. Yeah, get down, you pink bastard. This game is just heroic. The music is absolutely amazing. Just check this one out. Yeah, I was completely absorbed by the world of Golden Axe as a little kid. I used to read the Sonic the Comic magazine here in the UK every week, and this strip was probably my favourite. Yeah, it's a wonderful game, perfectly capturing that Conan vibe with absolute aplomb. Absolutely more than the sum of its parts, this one, because it does have flaws and exploits here and there, but it just doesn't matter, because it just overwhelms you with its absolute awesomeness. A true arcade and Mega Drive all-time classic. Don't fuck up the new one, Sega, please. I know you will. Streets of Rage, known as Bare Knuckle, is a beat-em-up developed and published by Sega for the Genesis in 1991. Players control one of three former police officials turned vigilantes who battle a crime syndicate. It establishes many of the conventions of the Streets of Rage series, of course, such as two-player cooperative play and an acclaimed techno soundtrack from composer Yuzo Koshiro. It features aspects of Double Dragon and Final Fight. Players act as Adam, Axel, or Blaze, who save Wood Oak City from being overtaken by a criminal syndicate led by Mr. X. The 3 traverse 8 levels and all have a total of 40 moves, such as headbutts, backslams, and reverse kicks. Surrounding the landscapes are weapons that can be used to attack enemies such as knives, glass bottles, pipes, and baseball bats, and food items that increase energy such as apples and chicken in bins. Lead designer Noriyoshi Oba broached the idea of doing a street fighting game along the lines of Final Fight and Double Dragon with Yuzo Koshiro. Oba was also influenced by action television shows such as Starsky and Hutch and The A-Team. The game was designed for players to focus on preventing enemies from swarming them, as well as to work with a second player using various cooperative team moves. The game topped the UK charts upon release. Streets of Rage went on to be one of the best-selling Sega games as of 1992. It was very well received, and that's because it's fucking awesome. Electronic Gaming Monthly claimed it was a winner in a category that was lacking on the 16-bit Sega, and a real version of Double Dragon for the Genesis. The magazine's critics were quick to call it the best fighting game of all time, making it superior to other titles such as Final Fight. They highlighted its superb graphics, terrific interaction, huge amount of attacks, and 2-player mode, and called its music funkadelic and better than Sonic the Hedgehog. Strange comparison. What can I say about this one? It's one of my favourite games of all time, bettered only by its own sequel. Yeah, but certain elements of this game, including the soundtrack, actually are the best in the series, in my opinion. It updates at just 30 frames per second, so it's a little bit juddery compared to the other two, but the gameplay is of course magnificent. Never mind Mr. X, these little gingerhead shits here are your real worst enemy in this game, sprinting out of nowhere and jabbing you straight in the nose with all the speed and power of Manny Pacquiao. I love this game, which is why I did a video about it along with 2 other games just a few months ago. In 2-player mode, this is one of the most enjoyable 45 minutes of gameplay you can find anywhere to this day. Number 1. Streets of Rage 2, otherwise known as Bare Knuckle 2, is a 1992 side-scrolling beat-em-up video game published by Sega for the Genesis, a sequel to Streets of Rage, of course. The characters Axel Stone and Blaze Fielding return, while the game also introduces 2 new characters, Max Thunder and Eddie Skate Hunter, the younger brother of Adam Hunter from the first game. Streets of Rage 2 was developed by an ad hoc team of several companies: Sega, Ancient, Shout, Designworks, M&M Software, and HIC. Interesting. Ancient's Ayano Koshiro was the lead graphic designer and one of the game design planners, while her brother, Yuzo Koshiro, composed the music. The game was programmed by the same team as the original. Upon release, Streets of Rage 2 received critical acclaim and topped sales charts for months. The game is commonly regarded as the best entry in the series, the best beat-em-up game for the Sega Genesis / Mega Drive, one of the best beat-em-up and Sega Genesis games in general, and is considered one of the greatest video games of all time. 1 year has passed since the events of Streets of Rage. To celebrate the defeat of the mysterious Mr. X and his criminal organisation, the Syndicate, the trio of Axel Stone, Adam Hunter and Blaze Fielding had met at their favourite night spot in Wood Oak City, reminiscing about both their vigilante crusade and triumphant victory from within the previous year. What? Japlish, folks. Blah, 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 blah. The quartet soon embarks on a rescue mission which will take them from Wood Oak City all the way to Mr. X's hideout on a desolate island, where they will eventually face Mr. X and his bodyguard, Shiva. Unlike the other two games in the series, Streets of Rage 2 has only one ending, where Mr. X is defeated and Adam is rescued, after which the heroes leave in a helicopter. Is this game perfect? Yes. Enough said, really. No, I'm kidding. I mean, this game made the excellent original look a generation behind it, with its absolutely ludicrous graphics, its gigantic sprites, incredibly detailed and handsomely drawn backdrops, and its amazing performance, not to mention its gameplay, of course. I'm almost ashamed to admit that I loved this game so much as a kid that I used to rope my best friends into acting out little plays of it for my no doubt intensely bored parents back in the early 90s, I guess, leaping around on the grass in my backyard with my dad's tie wrapped around my head and skinny little milk bottle child arms flailing around everywhere. Jesus Christ, I can't believe I just told you all that. I was always Axel, my big chunky mate Sully was always Max, and we didn't know any black kids at school or anything, so my mate Callum played Skate. Those were the days. Fuck me, that's embarrassing. But anyway, what an awesome game. The perfect fusion of music and gameplay with an irresistible sense of momentum and flow to the whole thing. It's also endlessly replayable, and the ending always feels frantic and exciting, even if you've played it 1,000 times before. What a journey. How does one put it into words? Well, it's impossible, really, isn't it? Just play it instead. In my opinion, this is the coolest fucking game ever made. Play it now.
Go! Now!
So there you have it, folks. The Mega Drive / Genesis was with us during the halcyon days of the scrolling 2D beat-em-up, and consequently, it has one of the strongest libraries of all time. Many, and possibly all of you, will disagree with my lineup here, and I would not have it any other way. So please, guys, tell me, what are your favourite Mega Drive beat-em-ups? Please let me know in the comments below, and please remember...